Hi all, I'm Professor Tina Good, and this is video number 2 of the brainstorming and drafting video. You probably will recall if you read, I'm sorry, if you watched the first part of this, the brainstorming, that my computer shut down. And so hopefully I've got all of that fixed, and I will complete that video by focusing on the drafting part of the writing process in this particular video. Now, you will recall that I said that remember, the writing process is not a linear process, right? It's actually more of a spiral process of what we call a recursive process. It does not just go from point to point to point to point, even though we often describe it as first you brainstorm, then you draft, then you revise. Well, but that is actually, sort of feeds on each other, right? So I want to remind you of that as I go into this part about drafting, that drafting and brainstorming are not necessarily discrete from each other, okay? But the point is that I don't want you to spend too much time on brainstorming exercises that you exhaust yourself from actually drafting. And I don't want you to confuse the drafting process with the brainstorming process, right? Those are two different processes. And you can get yourself into trouble if you try to use your brainstorm as, a draft that you just sort of fix up and put periods or spelling or whatever in, right? They are actually two separate processes, and they do two separate things, even though they might inform each other. Okay, so I want to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and finish up with that same PowerPoint that I started with in the previous video. And this will wrap up our brainstorming and drafting experience. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so you remember that I left off with the brainstorming, and I said, after you finish your brainstorming, go through, highlight ideas that came up that you think you would like to include in your project, and then put your brainstorming away. Okay, and then start your drafting process so that the brainstorming text is what I call tyranny of the text. It's not controlling what you're going to write in the drafting process. Instead, if it's more informing it. Now, that assumes that you're going to start drafting right after you finish brainstorming. And hopefully that is what you can do, right? I highly encourage that is the process that you use, that you, when you sit down to do brainstorming, that you allow yourself enough time to do brainstorming and to at least put together an initial draft. Okay. Now, some people have been taught that when they start drafting, that they should do an outline. Okay. And if that works for you, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. If that's what you need to do to get started, that's fine. I don't find it particularly productive at this point. One, you haven't, sort of created or generated all of your ideas for the paper. And two, what I think can happen is that people spend too much time crafting their outline that they find themselves, too tired or too exhausted to actually write the paper. I do think that there is a moment in the writing process where outlining becomes very useful, particularly within organization, um, but maybe not as productive here. Again, if this works for you, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying it's wrong to do it. I just think it might be a little premature if that is, where you are trying to put it in and it's not working for you. Um, what I do think might be better, and by the way, that once again assumes that you're writing a short essay, 2 to 5 pages. A longer work might require you to do a little outlining so that you have a direction for your overall project. But rather than outlining, what I think might be more useful is that you use this idea of clustering. And we talked a little bit about clustering in brainstorming. And that's where you're just throwing all your ideas down on the paper. And then you circle them. And then maybe by the time you start drafting, you can start drawing connections. I've put a link here on the PowerPoint that I think is to a good video that shows you how to use clustering. I think it's useful. And so I would encourage you to try clustering over outlining at this part of the process. Again, whatever works for you is what counts. But I would like you to try these different steps to see if something else works maybe even better for you. Okay? Now, again, I say when you are starting your draft, don't start with your introduction. Obviously, you're going to have to write something to get you started, and that's fine. That's fine. But there are particular elements that you will need to include in an introduction, depending on what genre you are writing. And what can happen is your brain can shut down by trying to write the most awesome introduction and you don't get to your draft. I guarantee you that you're going to be revising your introduction anyway as you write your draft. So just put it away. You know, the idea of introduction. I'm going to be putting out a video later about what you should put in an introduction. So just put away that idea of the formal introduction, that attention getting introduction. Just put that away and just get yourself started. Okay. And we'll come back to the introduction. Don't you worry. But for now, the important part is that you get your ideas down on paper. Okay. And then, like I said, if you don't begin your drafting process right after you've finished brainstorming, which is, what I prefer you do, but things happen in life and you might not get to it right away, then make sure that you go back and read your brainstorming, right? Just to get your mind going again, just refresh your brain. Read through your brainstorming, maybe highlight different points again, then put it away and start writing your draft. Okay, start writing about the points or the ideas that you highlighted in your brainstorming. And while you're writing, you're going to start thinking of more ideas. Okay, as you're doing that, I want you to also start thinking about what is the main point of your writing project? What is the purpose of your overall project? What is the thing that you want your audience to understand differently as a result of reading your project? Okay. And try to write that down. It doesn't need to be in a formal thesis statement yet, but try to have a general sense of purpose, as you are writing, so that you can start beginning to understand what you're going to keep in, what you're going to keep out. Now, that don't be premature about that, okay? That purpose might change as you keep writing your draft. And so that's why, like don't be too rigid about that main point until you get to the end of your draft, because as you're writing, you might still be coming up with more ideas and your purpose might shift slightly, right? Your point might shift slightly. Okay. So, but do try to keep writing down, sort of drafts of your purpose as you're continuing to write the points that you want to bring up in your paper. Remember, it's always easier to cut, right, than it is to expand ideas. So you don't want to be premature in leaving out ideas. Eventually you're going to have to do that. There's no question about it. But don't be too premature. Try to get everything down. Try to start focusing your mind around a purpose, right? So you're not just brainstorming, you're not just, throwing things down. But then as you are drafting, you're having your purpose morph as you continue to draft. Okay. Then once you come to the end of your drafting process, now I want you to go back and write your introduction, right? And we'll talk more about how to write an introduction, later on. But, it's the basic things. You want to be attention getting, you want to state your main point, right? So just, try to go back then after you've drafted and go, okay, now I need to start, focusing my paper. Now you can write your introduction. And now you're going to go through your draft and you're going to start, developing ideas that work towards your introduction a bit more, and maybe start taking things out that, were good ideas, but aren't quite working to your purpose anymore. And I always say, because people like once they put, their effort and their heart into writing, sometimes it's hard to cut it out. You're like, oh, but that was such a good point, and maybe it just doesn't fit anymore. So what I say is, cut and paste it onto another document, keep it, and maybe you're going to use it later on for another essay. Okay, so you don't lose it altogether. Just cut it and paste it and put it into another document. Okay, and then as you get through your draft, you're focusing it towards your purpose, then you're going to write your conclusion. Now, I actually think the conclusion is the hardest part to write, right? Um, and we're going to talk more about how to write conclusions. But your conclusion should not, especially in a 2 to 5 page essay, should not restate what you've already said. It's 2 to 5 pages. We can remember, right? So instead, write about what do you want your audience, right, to take away from reading your essay, right? What do you want them to understand? What do you want their emotional response to be? What do you want their thought process to be? And capture that in your conclusion rather than simply just restating what you've already said. Okay. And then after you've done that, now is when I encourage you to write the outline of your draft, right? And we call this a descriptive outline, okay? So that what you do is you go in and you look at your paragraphs and you write, what is the point of that paragraph? Okay, and you write that down in an outline form. And if you don't know what the point of that paragraph is, or maybe you've gotten 2 or 3 points into that paragraph, that's when your outlining is going to start discovering that, right? And so you can start teasing out your paragraphs or maybe developing your points a little bit more, right? So this is when I want you to do an outline, what we call a descriptive outline. Describe what is in your essay, paragraph by paragraph. And then we can start working on organization, okay? And that will be in my next video. So don't worry, we're gonna get to organization and all of that. But right now, the most important thing is that you get your thoughts down on paper and begin to organize them around some sort of purpose. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful as you begin drafting your essays, and we will be sending more videos out about the writing process in the weeks ahead. Okay, so have a good day.